Now, we begin with this on the notion of self. So we have talked about the importance of knowing the self. Now, what is this self? Somebody may ask. We may be wondering, what is this self? The notion of self, selfhood, is it the same thing? So what is this? Now, to help us to understand this notion of self, let us see what has happened in Western philosophy. You will see in this my paper, it is available, hopefully online. The first very introduction of this my paper, published just recently, 2025. The just introduction, I gave a kind of a panorama, just a run through on how the reactions, the response on this question of self. So during the ancient times, Socratic Plato, in Plato's work we see Socrates being engaged and engaging people. So the Socratic Plato more or less means the Socrates, that Platonic dialogue where Socrates is made the philosopher engaged. So we can say that the idea in Plato's work is both shared by Socratic and Plato. Okay, so the Socratic Plato in ancient times, in the idealism, not only believed in the existence of the self, but identified things to the idea, and of the human person to its soul or intellect. So Socrates and Plato did not deny or question the existence of self. In fact, for them, the self for the human person is the soul, and the soul for the human person or the intellect is the form. And for Socrates and Plato, it is not just, it is the real person or the real thing is the idea or the form of the thing. So, and the form of the human person is the intellect, the soul is the person. So the self for Socrates and Plato is not contested, is not denied. They hold that there is a self, and this self exists. So that is for Socrates and Plato. But what happens after? Aristotle believes that everything has a formal principle, which in living things he calls the form, and humans the intellectual or the rational soul. So in living things generally, Aristotle says in his work De Anima, on the soul, that everything that lives have a sort of soul. So soul for Aristotle is the principle of life. So anything that lives has some kind of soul. So we don't want to go into the three kind of souls in Aristotle, but the point is, for Aristotle, everything has a formal principle. Okay, so for the human being, this formal principle, what makes the person is the soul, the intellectual or the rational soul. And so there is this subsistence reality that is in the person, which is the intellectual or the rational soul that exists, even though it cannot be seen with the eyes. Okay. During the ancient times, so besides Socrates and Plato that believes on the self as the form of the thing, as the idea that is the thing, and the Aristotle that gives everything that exists in the natural world, everything that exists has its formal principle, and for the human being is the intellectual soul or the rational soul. Since at the same time where we have philosophers that affirm the existence of the self or some kind of substratum in the human person that exists, different from the physical part. We have also philosophers during the ancient times that deny the existence of the self or any spiritual, ontological principle in the human person. And a good example are the atomists, Democritus and Leucippus. So these atomists, and their followers deny the ontological existence of such a metaphysical abstraction or reality, that there is anything besides the physical part of the human being that exists different from the physical reality. So this is very important, and this tradition continues in philosophy, the Western philosophical tradition. So almost at every epoch of philosophical discourse, we have a kind of, in both camps, those who affirm the self as existing and those who deny the self as existing. During the Hellenistic period, that is dominated by the philosophy of Plato. So what is sometimes called the, Platonism. The Platonic idealism endured through the Hellenistic period, arguably championed by Plotinus in his articulation of the notion of the intellect, intellectus, the nous. So if you read the works or the Aeneid, of Plotinus, you will see Plotinus in his work, using the notion of intellectus, affirms the existence of the self. During this Hellenistic period, just as we have Plotinus that affirms the existence of the self by the means of the notion of intellect or intellectus or nous, you will also have Epicurus and his followers, Epicureans, who employs the natural philosophy of Democritus and Leucippus, the atomists, to deny the existence of self. During the classical ancient period, you have Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle affirming the existence of self, and at the same time you have Democritus and Leucippus denying it. You have during the Hellenistic period, Plotinus and the other Platonic philosophers affirming the existence of self. We also have Epicurus and their followers denying the existence of self. So you see the trend that at every time you have those who are affirming and those who are denying the existence of self. Now, however, during the Scholastic or the Middle Ages generally, the notion of the Platonic intellectus and Aristotelian intellectual soul was employed by the scholastics. So whether the Judaic scholastics or the Islamic scholastic or the Christian scholastics. In other words, those, whether in Judaism or Islam or Christian, who employs the Greek philosophy of that of Plato and later that of Aristotle to articulate and to explain and to expound their faith, either the Judaic faith or the Islamic faith, or the Christian faith, as a structure of their theological discourse. So during the Middle Ages, using this Plato and Aristotle's notion of the soul, the self was affirmed. They articulated the existence of an immortal self-subsisting substance, the human soul. So you can say that during the Middle Ages, that because it is dominated by theological discourse, there is really no much denial, if you like, or strong, vehement denial of the existence of the self. So rather, the use of Plato's and Aristotle's philosophy were used to affirm the existence of an immortal self-subsisting substance, the soul. Then, when we get to the modern philosophical era, beginning with Descartes, the dawn of modern philosophy, especially with the mechanistic empiricists and the phenomenalists, ably represented by the philosopher Hobbes and Hume, there is a resumption of the self-skepticism, the skepticism of the self, the denial of the existence of the self, resumed after the Middle Ages. This is after Descartes, when Descartes established the metaphysics of the mind, or what today is called philosophy of mind. So Descartes affirmed the self by his cogito ergo sum. So having affirmed the self, we found those who now denied. Why Descartes affirmed the existence of the self, we have the mechanistic empiricist philosophers like Hobbes and Hume, who denied completely the existence of the self, or they were skeptical about the existence of the self. And this trend continued. During the German, then you have the German idealism. The German idealists articulated and established the self, or human subjectivity. So now, the notion of self, then we're going to see the human subjectivity, the question of subjectivity. Which is the same? We are going to explain. At the nucleus, so the German idealists articulated and established the self and human subjectivity at the nucleus of not just philosophy but human thought per se. So the German, having a long, after a long denial of skepticism of the self by the mechanistic empiricists, then the idealists came up vehemently in defense of the self. In fact, they made the self as the real, as reality itself. And then Hegel took it to its peak, its climax, and talked about the absolute self. The absolute self. So and then consciousness, the ego. The ego. So this endured in the German idealism. And of course later in both French and English and then American idealism. That were built on the German idealism. The notion of self became central to the philosophical discourse. This continued in the phenomenological movement in Husserl, Heidegger, and then even in existentialism. The question of subjectivity, which now we are going to gradually now try to understand deeper the meaning of this.